and a good turnout. Right, this is the Licensing and Regulatory Committee. Start with the minutes of the meeting held on the 18th of September, which have been laid on the table. Are you happy for me to sign those?
Agreed.
Good. Apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chairman. Apologies have been received from Councillor Andrew Wilson.
Thank you. Declarations of interest. Mrs. Ellis.
Thank you, Chairman. If I may declare an interest in item 7, I am a member of Cranley Parish Council, but when the matter was discussed, I left the chamber and I did not enter into the debate or participate in the vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Mrs. Brown? Any questions received?
Sorry, Chairman, none received.
Action authorised. To authorise the action taken by the Executive Director after consultation with the Chairman and Vice Chairman since the last meeting, suspension of a hackney carriage private hire driver's licence with immediate effect on the advice of the Council's consultant doctor, the suspension to be until such time as he is able to satisfy the Council's consultant doctor as to his fitness to drive.
Chairman, if I could just correct that slightly, it should be to note the action that's already been taken. There's nothing to authorise.
So, is that noted? Right, that one was easy then. No items under the Licensing Act. Right, financial strategy. You have a revised Annex 1 circulated, otherwise as per the agenda papers. Mr. Long, are you going to take us through this?
Yes, Chairman. First, I'd like to apologise for not checking the figures carefully enough before they were sent out, hence the revised Annex 1. The total figures were correct, but unfortunately there was a one-off item in 1314 that is now shown at line 9, and the formatting of the sheet, I'd missed the one-off item, which meant that the figures were a line adrift. So things like hired and contracted services figures were shown under telephones and etc. But the Annex 1 now is correct as distributed. In fact, most of the action takes place on Annex 2 as far as the report goes, and then that was correct as sent out. But because one read this, Annex 1 is the actual budget, and the recommendation refers to Annex 1, so it was important to get that correct for the minutes of the meeting. So the main purpose is one, to agree the licensing estimates as shown at Annex 1 for the year ahead, 15-16, and following that to agree the fees and charges for the year beginning in April. There's not a lot really to say that's not in the report already, and just to emphasise, it's pretty straightforward for the licensing service this year because there are no Star Chamber proposals that affect the service. Most of the analysis takes place on Annex 2, and the point of Annex 2 is to show the relative recovery rates. It's page 11 of the three main components of the licensing service, and to emphasise that we're not permitted to recover the enforcement costs. We estimate enforcement costs to be around 10% of our total costs, so therefore our recovery rate shouldn't really exceed 90%. And Annex 2 demonstrates that we're around that right sort of level. So unless there are any dramatic changes, if we carry on at the current rate, we're about where we should be. By way of updates on the figures, the one item which isn't yet included and isn't yet agreed, but it's finding its way through the committee process, is the staff pay award, which potentially is 1.6% from the 1st of April, subject to agreement by the Executive and Council. That will, of course, add something just under £4,000 to the cost, and it will take, as far as this committee is concerned, and it will reduce the recovery rates by about 1%, but that's still around that sort of order, and clearly we can't go much higher than the 90% level because of the enforcement cost issue. And then when the committee looked at the fees and charges, which start at page 13 through to page 15, very modest increases proposed. We've said under 2%, that generally at 1.2% was the rate of CPI when we proposed those levels. We clearly aren't looking to eat into the recovery rate anymore because of the enforcement issue, as I mentioned. So we'd be happy, myself or the two service colleagues with me, to take any questions there might be.
Right, members, does anybody have any questions? Yeah, Mrs. Ellis.
Thank you, Chairman, and forgive my ignorance on financial matters. Just going back to the licensing service, it's just a small query. On the codes, we have legal fees, vets fees, Criminal Record Bureau, DBS, all with the same code number. Can you just tell me whether that's correct?
Well, it's a matter of fact that they are all coded to the 1344 within the financial system. We then have a more detailed analysis of that 1344, which we don't show printed here, which separates the various elements out. But it's basically the fee code 1344, and they're all fees of sorts.
Right. Anybody else wish to raise? No? Right then. Well, the recommendation is that we agree the draft revenue estimates as shown in Annex 1 and approve the level of fees and charges for 2015.
Chairman, can I just make clear that those will be recommended to the Council for final decision?
Oh, we agree? Very good. Right. We move on then to the Waverley Borough Council designated streets review. This, as you know, arose from a review of the street trading policy. And there are proposals put forward for redesignating streets in Godalming and Cranley. I think at this stage I'll just throw it open to the members. Are there any comments that people wish to make at this stage? Oh, sorry, Colin. Mr. Giddings, would you introduce it?
Just one point I was discussing with Helen Rillier before. Although the recommendations in the report have come out of the consultation process on the policy, you are free as a committee to make any recommendations for changes that you like. You don't have to restrict yourselves just to these, but these are the ones that did receive feedback through the consultation process.
Thank you. So, members, if you want to make recommendations regarding every street in Waverley, you can. But we would prefer it if you could find your attention to things that really matter. Anybody wish to raise any? I think, yes, Mrs. Evans.
Thank you, Chairman. As a Cranley Parish Councillor, I'm obviously aware of what I've read here, what they did submit. And whilst I'm sympathetic with a slightly opposing view from the Cranley Chamber of Trade, my personal feeling is that I would support the opportunities in Cranley to have local festivals, and I'm thinking perhaps of things like the Lions Carnival and the bonfire, that sort of thing, where people want to be able to buy an ice cream or a candy floss or hog roast, that sort of thing. I'm understanding that we had a problem with somebody who wanted to sell burgers, and it was a grave problem. And actually, it was in a residential area, and the only way we managed to stop it, I think I'm correct in saying, was because it was in the conservation area. And there are other areas where we might have slight problems, but overall, my personal feeling is I would like to support Cranley Parish Council's view on this and to leave the status quo, as it were. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. King.
So, Chairman, I wonder if I could make an observation, please, that officers might like to pick up, but it would have been incredibly helpful if we'd had a map showing the proposed area. I don't know Cranley very well, and I found it quite difficult to find it last night on the map. So it would be helpful in future if we could have a map of the area. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, there are two streets that have been raised, one in Godalming and one in Cranley. So first of all, I think I'd ask for your views on the Godalming amendment. Does anybody have any strong views on the Godalming one? Mrs. Cable.
Really, it's just some more information. I mean, regarding Bridge Street, if we were to change the status of that, how much does the advertising cost?
Mr. Giddings?
To be frank, I honestly don't know that one. When we last advertised for a change, it was about 5 years ago, and it was a few hundreds of pounds. It's 2 public notices a month or so apart, I believe.
So it's not going to break the bank.
When Paul Hughes comes back, he may be able to advise you, because he's familiar with advertising frequently in respect of licensing matters.
Right. Assuming that the cost of it isn't prohibitive, although even if the cost is quite high, we really should consider it in the light of the representations that have been made. Godalming Town Council has requested that it be listed as a consent street. Are members happy to put that recommendation forward to the full council? Mrs. Cable.
I would be interested to hear what our 2 Godalming people have to say. I mean, personally, it seems to me it would be a good idea, but I would be very interested to hear what they have to say.
Very happy to the geography of it is that you can come down Wharf Street, which is past the Conservative, the old Conservative Club and Fleury and that, and then you bear left up a little bit of the High Street to get into Queen Street, and that cannot be closed under any circumstances. But the idea is, instead of closing the whole of the High Street farmers' markets, to close the Bridge Street bit so that traffic can still flow down Wharf Street and up the High Street most of the time, but just occasionally a smaller farmers' market can be held on the Bridge Street end, and we don't then have to close the whole of the High Street, which is quite complicated at the top end with Church Street. But over the years, I mean, it's worked out. It's not a problem. I don't see this is an improvement, and but makes sense.
Thank you. Mrs. King, did you want to?
Yes, Chairman, if I may, through you, ask my colleague on my right, in that case, how you would get out of the Queen Street car park and turn right, which you are permitted to do. I can't figure out how. You wouldn't be able to, would you?
No.
Oh, right, no.
Effectively, what you're saying, Mrs. King, is that if you close Bridge Street, you effectively close Queen Street, because... No. Yes, you do. Well, if you have driven up into Queen Street, the only way out of Queen Street is to turn right at the bottom and go back down towards Bridge Street. You're not allowed to turn left into the High Street.
No, that's true. You have to go. I don't think they thought that through. I must have been. Damn you.
Councillor Story.
I don't know whether this is helpful, Chairman, but when Farnham Council closed Downing Street, the Wagon Yard car park was in a similar position, and there was a temporary lifting of the one-way system in the bottom end of Downing Street, so that it became two-way traffic, just to allow people in and out of the car park.
I don't really see how that could be done with Queen Street, because you wouldn't be able to turn right up Wharf Street, and it's the way that the bollards are positioned at the entrance to the High Street, it's not possible to turn left at the bottom of Queen Street. The only way you can do it is drive into the King's Arms car park and reverse out, and then turn up the High Street. But
Tricky, inverted commas.
yes. I'm personally leaning towards feeling that allowing Wharf Street to become a consent street and allowing it to be closed is not practical. Sorry, Bridge Street, sorry, yes.
I should refer it back.
Right. Yes, Mr. Councillor Byam.
I'm sorry, I realised then I needed to read what is there in more detail. When do the farmers' markets take place? It's a Sunday, isn't it? Saturday. It's a Saturday. Oh, so I'm thinking of the problem of the amount of traffic and buses, of course, including commercial traffic. But the principle seems to be, their thinking seems to be correct, but the problem is the logistics, which sounds to be very difficult.
Wherever you hold it, the bus routes have to be suspended, don't they? Because there are bus routes down both the High Street and down Bridge Street.
Yes, it's traffic.
Well, I think we should ask Godalming Town Council to think again. Clarification, yes. What their solution to it is. So moving on to the Cranley Street. We've heard from Mrs. Ellis on it. Any further comments? Yes, Mrs. Cable.
Just one point. I mean, they suggest for clarity that Horseshoe Lane is included as a prohibited street, but surely the common is a consent area and needs to be. Does that not mean that the streets around it are also automatically? Or can you make them a prohibited and have the common, do you see what I'm trying to say, as a consent area? I don't think this will work either, that's what I'm basically saying. I mean, I don't know whether we can have a comment on that. I mean, the common is a consent area, is that correct?
I believe it is, yes.
Because they have fates and what have you there.
Yeah.
So surely the roads around it are also a consent area, are they not?
I don't know, does that follow, Mr. Gidding?
Yes, that's right. It's the roads immediately abutting the common that are also part of the consent area, so that they can be controlled as well.
So in other words, this is another one that's not possible.
Mrs. Ellis, with your local knowledge?
Well, I think that there is always some concern over where Horseshoe Lane starts and finishes, which has been an issue going on for very many years. And I have to say that Horseshoe Lane, where it actually crosses the common, is an area that we would want to be as a consent area, because that's where the carnival, everybody gathers, and there's stalls, that sort of thing. So I don't know whether that's, I mean, I think what it's being indicated is leave it as it is at the moment.
Right. Does anybody else have a comment? I mean, I'm slightly getting the feeling here that this again is a proposal that hasn't really been very well thought through. So, yeah, Colin.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, at the time that this response came in from the parish council, where they said they were seeking clarification that Horseshoe Lane is included as a prohibited street, I did respond to them to say the situation around the common is that it isn't included as a prohibited street, and that it ought not to be. I get the impression the parish council is asking for the status quo, but they would have liked that. I've already responded to them to say the situation is it can't be. So it's in here because that's part of their response, but I don't think the parish council is actually asking for it to become a prohibited street.
Mrs. Ellis.
Sorry, if I come back to my point that there's always been this question about Horseshoe Lane itself, and the general feeling is that it starts further up towards Cranley School, and that the part that crosses the actual common was not ever considered to be called Horseshoe Lane. Now, when we had the grave problem, which went on for a long time with the burger van, you know, it then brought up the issue about the naming of the road. And my feeling is I will support that, retain it as it is. But the parish council needed clarification about that particular section of the road, that it was included as a consent. And I don't think they're asking for it to be forbidden. Thank you.
Well, it sounds to me then, perhaps naively, that all that's required on this one is for a clear map of the area to be sent to the parish council, telling them exactly which streets are consent and which are prohibited. Would that resolve their worries on the matter? So does that deal with the Cranley issues then? So it seems to me that Cranley we can resolve simply by sending them a clarification, and Godalming, I think our recommendation has to be, and unless anybody disagrees, that the suggestion be rejected because it, in its present form, it's not practicable. Yes, Mr. Giddings.
Sorry, may I ask, is it possible to have a recommendation that says it's to allow it to go through the process, subject to satisfactory resolution of the traffic issue or something like that? Or it has to be rejected, does it? That's...
Well, I'm not too sure how they could arrive at a satisfactory resolution of the traffic problem, but you know, if they can come up with some miraculous way, Mrs. Cable, yes.
I feel very strongly that the onus is on them to resolve the problem, and then we can look at it again. But I don't think the other way around.
Okay, well, in that case, yeah, King.
On the Godalming one, I think I agree with what's been said. It's on the onus on Godalming to get it sorted out. I actually think it's a serious enough issue for traffic there by community safety that we have to reject it, and if they wish to come back, they have to come back with a new and proper proposal. Thank you.
So the suggestion then, members, is that we reject that proposal and tell the Godalming Town Council that if they wish to come back with an alternative proposal that resolves the traffic issues, then we will look at it again. Hmm.
You've got to
So, members, are we... Yeah. So, we are then recommending the first part of our recommendation, that the designation of streets remains unaltered. Are we all agreed? Good. So, item 8, minutes of the meeting held on the 18th of September. I thought we'd already received that. Have we not? Oh, on the 18th and 27th of November, yes. Are you happy for me to sign those minutes? Agreed. Good. Exclusion of press and public, not needed. Legal advice? No. That concludes Mrs. King.
Sorry, Chairman, there's a set of minutes of the 27th of November, which are shown at Annex 1, which is a bit odd, which I still have an issue. It doesn't appear to have been clarified. On page 28, we seem to have got a time issue at the bottom of the page, and I wonder if that has been resolved. I might have missed it in the other set of minutes, but it just didn't look quite right to me.
Sorry, what, page 28?
Sorry, it's the bottom of page
1017, question mark, question, yes.
28, and again at the top of page 29.
Yes, we're in the same place at the same
Because there's a conflict of time with the other, the hearing. It doesn't make sense. We can't have been in two places at once.
We do, yes.
We can refer back and clarify those times and amend the minutes.
Thank you. Right. Otherwise, I think that now concludes this meeting. So